Hey, this is Vu, and today I'm going to take a look at some tips to improve your T side. And the first thing to realize here is the difference between working picks and a default. And sometimes it can be tough to tell, but generally a default is looking for map control, and working picks is just like that, it's working picks. So when you're running a default, usually you're doing something like a 1-3-1 here on Mirage. You're going 1A, 1B, and 3 towards middle, and you'll probably have some communication as to what's going on. In that circumstance, you're not looking really for kills in the mid round. Generally, what you want to be doing in this sort of area is you're looking for kills early if you have a spawn and you can catch someone off guard. For example, if you have an A ramp spawn, maybe you go for that pick. If you have a mid spawn, you can go for that pick. But once you get into the meat of the round, right in the middle, especially these players in the middle of the map, you're just looking for map control, and you want to make sure you're using your utility to try to prevent CTs from picking you off. Obviously, the nature of going for map control is that your opponents are going to be contesting these angles. For example, on Mirage here, you're probably going for connector control and ladder room control, and the CTs know they don't really want to give those areas up. Those are important areas to control in order to actually win rounds, but you should also know that if you can get control of those areas, you should be happy with that and don't necessarily try to go for more. If you're in a 5v5 and you've got connector and ladder control, you don't need to force your way out top connector, which is essentially a death trap, in order to get frags. No, you can communicate with your team and try to get them to loop back around, go for something like a 3-2 split or something like that, and actually play out the late round effectively. Just make sure you try to keep that in mind, that it's not all about kills when you're defaulting. Now, you might also end up in situations, especially in matchmaking, when there's very little communication, where you're kind of just running around the map looking for entries, and when that happens, you are working picks, and you want to be making sure that in this circumstance especially, but also when you're running defaults and anything like that, you have entry frag routes. Now, I have a video on entry frag routes myself. I'll put it in the description, but the idea behind an entry frag route is simply a line you can walk into a bomb site or run where you're clearing out angles one by one by one, and you have kind of a sequence that you're running as you do so. So over here on the B side, you can try and do something like walking up. You can clear out all of these angles one by one, and until a certain point, you're clearing angles out where you're not necessarily exposed to more than one spot at a single time. Now, Mirage is a tough map because you can't go too far before being exposed to multiple angles, but you can think about this type of thing on every single map, and in fact, I have a video on that as well. You can also be thinking about this type of entry frag route when you're going for this middle of the map play, when you're not necessarily trying to get kills. For example, an entry frag route towards middle, or just a control route, is maybe having someone throw that smoke towards top middle. You can throw the molly towards connector. You can also toss your own flash off the wall here to blind any opper that might have boosted up. Get over towards the boxes here at top mid, smoke in towards window, and then you can try and get over to chair, right? So you're trying to make sure that you have kind of a designated path that you're running over here to get into the angle you want to get into, so that when things go wrong, it's easier for you to understand how to react because you've been in this exact same situation many times. If you're running a different line over and over and you're never really doing the same thing, it means that you have exponentially more situations that you have to be comfortable reacting to, and that can be very tough to deal with. Now, while I say that it's important to recognize your goals when you're running a default, that it's not necessarily about getting kills, you also want to try to be aggressive. Be aggressive. Which means, like I said, you want to be taking these spawns that you have whenever possible, and if ever there's a situation where you know you can catch an opponent off guard, it's very important to be doing so. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be rushing into areas. A lot of the time you can feign aggression so that you can draw out utility, and that's an incredibly important idea, because otherwise, if you're going for something like a default and they just give up all the map control, you know, obviously they would like the map control, but if you use all your utility in getting it and your opponents have no worry that you're actually hitting the bomb site, they're just going to hold on to all their utility and destroy you when you go for the execute. So that's why you often see, for example, pro teams are throwing smokes that kind of land and block off the window here on B. They'll throw a smoke that lands right about there. They'll throw something like a molly towards B here, and then potentially a couple of flashes, and it's kind of like the B side utility. And the point behind it is twofold. First, it might draw out some utility from the CT side. It might make them play 2 players on the B bomb site and not actually contest mid as much as they otherwise would like to. It's the type of thing that can work very well to allow your team to either hit B late or to go back and rush B at a different time on a different round. So just throwing utility as like the B kind of solo player is something that can get work done. Obviously, you don't always want to be throwing that much utility, and usually most players don't throw that much or near that much when they're on the outskirts of the map, but I think it's a good example of the idea that you can use some utility and feigning aggression, or actually being aggressive and doing something like a B rush on one round and then going back and faking it later to draw out utility and make it easier for your team to close out rounds later on. Now, along the same lines of being aggressive, you want to make sure that you're not just baiting and allowing your teammates to run into areas. This is one of the most common things in matchmaking because people are worried about taking aim duels and trying to take control of areas. Part of going for an entry frag line consistently is it gives you an idea of what engagements are good for you and what are not. But oftentimes you'll see people, for example, on Banana, on Inferno, just stack up and never pass the important angle on the map. The same holds true for Mirage as well. People very often never try to enter connector or ladder room because they're seen as dangerous and scary places to enter. However, it's important that you have the confidence to do so and recognize that sometimes straight up aim duels are welcome. Now, I did earlier say that you're trying to make sure you're not getting picked by the CTs, and that's the idea that you don't want to be sitting in the middle of the open and get blinded and get easily killed. You don't want to be peeking into an angle and Opper is just holding it, catches you off guard and kills you. But if you know an angle where you can peek into it and someone's likely holding it with a rifle or it's op v op and you're comfortable with that, a 50-50 aim duel oftentimes is beneficial to you as a T, and recognizing that can allow you to be a little bit more aggressive in situations that warrant it and take control of certain areas. The worst thing you can be doing on a T side is just baiting hard, as your team is baiting hard as well, because then you actually get nothing done and you're never going to win the round. The final thing to think about are after plants, and after plants are little bit too complicated to really run through every single idea. However, I can give you a bit of a framework, and the idea is that obviously you want to be playing crossfires in the after plant and you want to be playing the bomb. Well, crossfires are important, and the idea that you can get behind when you're trying to get into crossfires is thinking of spots as how well do they work with each other. Instead of just thinking of one spot is good and one spot is bad, even if your teammate gets into a bad spot, oftentimes you can find an angle that will crossfire, will at least be a little bit playing together with that teammate. They will mesh somewhat, and you can try and prioritize spots that can play with those teammates as well as possible. Now, there are spots that are kind of S-tier spots. For example, Pit on Inferno can be a complementary angle to just about anywhere on the A site on Inferno, and there are spots like that on most maps in most positions. For example, Bench here on Mirage is a great spot that usually is somewhat complementary to the majority of different angles played. However, occasionally you're going to find a teammate that's just in a terrible afterplant spot, and the best thing to do oftentimes is to complement that spot, play somewhere where you can play off of the teammate, even if it's not technically the best spot physically possible otherwise. And when it comes to playing the bomb, this is something that actually really bothers me, because people oftentimes use play the bomb, and you can hear the air quotes there, as a reason to never peek anything. And it is a good reason to not over peek things. It is a good reason to not walk into angles that you don't necessarily need to control, like pushing through market would be kind of crazy if you're trying to play the bomb. However, you want to be using the bomb more as bait than anything else, especially especially earlier on in the timer. As the timer ticks down and down and down, sometimes you can just hide and allow them to try to tap the bomb and play from there. There are sometimes circumstances where you're in a 2v1, both players are low, and instead of trying to play the crossfire, you just play two 1v1s where they're forced to hit the bomb, find the first player, hit the bomb again, find the second player, and they simply don't have time to do so. However, in general, as the bomb is higher up and you just planted it, your opponents are going to be forced into angles. They're forced to use utility and try and walk into uncomfortable positions, and you can use that bait to get yourself in good crossfires, to catch players off guard with off angles and get free kills. Playing the bomb is not hiding and hoping the bomb blows up. It's using the bomb effectively as bait to win the round. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope this helped. Oh Patreon, I really love my supporters. Oh Patreon, my supporters fund the content. Oh Patreon, I really love my supporters. Oh Patreon, my supporters give me money.